Hi friends, welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be building out the village. So essentially we'll be getting some more assets to put in our village. We'll be modelling it all, placing it, just essentially making it look like a proper nice little village. So yeah, essentially that's what we're going to be doing, and yeah, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually I'm going to move this cottage asset, because currently it's just sitting in our root directory in our folder, which is not ideal because we would like to preferably put it inside of the gems folder. So what we're going to do is essentially we're just going to take the these four cottage files. We're just essentially going to delete them from here. Go to gem, assets, we can then create one called buildings. I'm then going to go in a new and create cottage. And then inside of this, I will then paste that. There we go. Okay, but then if we come back here, you're going to see that, yep, it's failed to render, and that is fine. So what we can do is just delete the cottage from here, and then we can just drag it on again through through the gem folder, the assets, the building, the cottage, and the dragging the FBX on, and there you go, the cottage loads in. There's currently a bug, as some of you might be aware, that where essentially the materials won't get saved to the object when you close the Lumberyard editor. I'm not entirely sure of the workaround to this, because sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes if you're inside the material file and you just like spam saving here, it will work sometimes. However, other times it will not. I will keep on looking for a solution that works for me, and when I do, I'll let you guys know through another video. But yeah, essentially. But the cottage for me looks slightly too big-ish, so I'm going to bring the size down for that, and I'm also going to reposition it, and as well as getting a few more assets for the village. So when I say assets, I mean like more cottages and buildings and objects and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, so what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to reposition this cottage a bit further back along the terrain. Let's just speed up the movement here. There we go, that's a lot better. Oh, maybe a bit too fast. Let's bring it down to 1. Let's set it to 5. Yeah, there you go, that's a lot better. So what I'm going to do is firstly just move it. We're going to move it back. And I believe I'm going to set it about there. I kind of like that because it's kind of like blending nicely in with the mountain, so it looks like it's actually built into it, which is something I really like. And yeah, I'm just going to leave that as that. I'm actually going to rotate it very slightly, wrong direction, or wrong axis, slightly that way, like that. There we go. And I'm going to potentially make it slightly smaller. There we go. So now if we go into this, that looks a lot better. And let's just see it from the character's perspective. So if we take hold of our main character, which is here, we can then move it over there. Sorry about this. Move it over here. And let's Control G it. There we go, that looks a lot better. So if we walk over to it, it looks a lot more in proportion, because the size of the cottage before was really large and it just didn't look well in terms of the proportion. However, actually, as you can see, as we come in here, the door looks absolutely massive compared to the character's view. As you can see, we're barely coming up to the doorknob. So yeah, actually I was wrong in terms of that. We definitely need to make it a lot smaller, this cottage. So if I just zoom in, we can do that again by clicking the resize tool up here. And if we just bring it down even further, and let's try that. There we go. So hold on, let me just drag the character even closer, so that'll make it easier for us to so we don't have to walk over each time. So now if we do it, yes, there we go. That's a lot better. And yeah, so we're now much taller within the door, and it does look a bit more in proportion. I might, however, still come back later and just make it slightly even smaller. I'm actually going to move it very... Okay, so we've now created one cottage. I'm actually going to rename this to Cottage 1. And then what we're going to do is... I'm going to essentially just copy this, because I want to create a very similar another cottage. So we can just duplicate this and then give it the name cottage 2, and then we can just take this cottage that we just have. There we go, we've got our second cottage. What we can do is we can, if we drag that out, we can then rotate it slightly on the x-axis that way, and then we can essentially drag that. Oops, I definitely, actually, it turns out the speed is too fast. Let me bring it down to 2. There we go, that looks a bit better. We can drag it slightly back. There we go. I'm now going to, I'm going to angle it a bit more. There we go. And I'm then going to bring it a bit forward like that. And then essentially I'm going to do the same thing again, duplicate it, create cottage 3, and then we can move that and bring it a bit forward. Essentially what I'm going to do is make some sort of like campfire sort of like circle of like buildings. I'm essentially using the same buildings because I like the way it, so it looks like this village has been built by like the same like creator. So it looks like this creator like the sort of look it gave. So that's the reason why I'm using this. However, I might potentially create a few more different buildings from and get these assets like from CG Trader, for example. And then I'm going to drag and do it again. So get cottage 4, and now this is the one where I'm going to rotate a lot further. And then I'm going to move that sideways. Oh, it is slightly in the air. So we're going to move that down. There we go. So now, if we go into the player's perspective, we can see that it actually looks pretty good now. So we've actually got 4 different villages. Okay, what I'm going to do now is actually I'm going to place a few trees around these cottages. So to do that, I'm just going to navigate to where we saved the trees within the assets trees folder, and then I'm going to just grab broadleaf hero to CGF1. There we go, and I'm just going to drag that back a bit and just between these like 2 houses. There we go, like that. That looks very good. So that just makes it, making it look a bit more like realistic. So if we go control, yeah, there we go. That looks a lot better. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to create a road. Oh, and by the way, we're going to be grouping these entities up later so they won't completely block up the entity outliner. They'll be all under one group called village. Okay, so what we're going to do now is actually I'm going to put another one of these on the other side just to match it. So just duplicate. And then we can rename it to cottage 5, and then we're going to, oops, we just want to drag it, oops, let's just leave it there for now. Take that, drag it, rotate 180 degrees ish, there we go. Then we can just drag it back into the hills a bit, raise it up. There we go, let's go see what that looks like. It is raised up slightly, so let's just bring it down that way. Actually, we can rotate it slightly forwards in this direction. Like that, there we go. And there we go, it's actually now blending in with the hill terrain. It is slightly wobbly, but that is fine. I'm going to move it back a bit. There we go. It's now built into the terrain, but it actually looks pretty good. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that for now. We will come back later and add some finer details onto this, but that is essentially the basis of building out our small village. There we go. And what I want to do is I'm going to, essentially the plan for what I want to do is essentially have like a well in the middle. I then want to have like a path coming off here and essentially into like another village over here. So it's like some sort of like valley with villages over here and then villages over here. So that's essentially why I'm going to essentially use different objects, different like buildings over there to make the two different villages like distinct, that they're different, and then have like a path in between. And essentially the RPG game is what that's what we're making. Is essentially like we can make some very interesting things to do with like how the character can interact with other like AI characters, for example. That will be coming in like later episodes. And essentially, yeah, I've got a few good plans for what we can do to make this game and what we're going to be making by the end result. And yeah, so that's going to be good. And so I'm going to have a look for some like cottage for some like well assets and some like lampposts and like old-fashioned lampposts. So that will help build out this village. And however, what we can do now is we can add like the road, which we talked about in the last episode. So you do that by going to the entity outliner, adding a road like that, and then how you can go ahead and you can, if you hold control while you are hovering over the road, it allows you to... Sorry, I do apologise. I forgot we had to add the required components. There we go, the spline. There we go. Now when we hold control, let's just extend it first. Let's extend the point. There we go. Now if we hold control while we're over it, we can add a point to make it bend. So let's say we were going to make the road a bit wider. Let's say about that. And then we're going to have it... let's say we want to have the whole road move slightly that way, so it comes out the center of the village. And then what we could do is if we grab the last point and we drag it all the way through to the other end of the village, like that, drag it a bit that way, so it goes into the other village. And essentially what we've done is we've created a road running from this end of the village to that other village over there, where we haven't built, which we'll be building up in the next episode or two. And what we can do along this road is we can add like vegetation, trees, and essentially what we could do is we could create it so so essentially there'll be like a forest either side, and essentially the character could walk through the forest to the other village or something around those sorts of lines. If you guys have any ideas of what we could potentially do with this sort of area, please let me know in the comments, because then it's good. That's what we could do. And yeah, so essentially I'm now going to spend some time looking for some well assets, for some lamppost assets. I'm also going to be making a video, potentially the next one and the one after that, where I talk about how we can actually make like light sources from lampposts. So essentially, let's say we had a lamppost next to this house here, there will actually be a light source coming out of the top of it, which is very cool, which you could do with inside Lumberyard. I'm also going to actually expand this village a bit more by adding a few more assets and potentially changing some of these cottage assets so they're not all the same. Even though I do like how they look all the same personally. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what they look like to me as long as they look good for what you want it to look like. So you could use different cottage assets if you wanted to. And yeah, so essentially you could use different cottage assets. But for me, I think I'm just going to leave it as these 5. But I am going to show you how to group all of these assets up together. And so to do this, I'm first going to rename this entity to road. But to group up these assets together, what we could do is if we create a new entity, then we just give it the name of village. What we could do is if we select these through cottage 5 to 1, including the here tree. I did this by clicking on 5 and holding shift and shift clicked 1, and that will select everything between 5 and 1. If we drag that into the village, the village has now become a parent object to all of these child objects. And if we rename this tree just a tree, there we go. So now we've got a village object within our entity outliner, and in the subsection of that we've got the cottages as well as the tree. And then we've got our road entity for the road running between the two villages, the second village we haven't built yet. And then we've just got our main character one, which is here. So if we do Control G, there's our main character. And then we've got just our default layer setup entity. I'm actually going to rename this one to Village 1 because, as I said before, we're going to be having 2 villages. And yeah, so essentially that's the end of this video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. It's not really a more like explaining video. It's not really much of a tutorial sort of video, but it's more of a just essentially doing like the basics to get our game up and running, so we can now we could be able to progress with like the actual mechanics of like programming it, like for this character to interact with other characters. And yeah, so essentially we will need to build out the other village. However, actually, yeah, we could quickly do that now, actually. So we could do this just by copying this village, by duplicating it, like that, and then moving it to the other side. And then, let's just dragging that over there. Dragging it over, oops, if I select this village, dragging it over here, and then rotating it, and like that, oops, there we go. And then, if I drag it this way, a bit forward, and then raising it up like that. And then if I go in and manually just bring this cottage, rotating it back to the normal because there's no bump like there is in the other one. And we can then lower this one like that. There we go. And then we can just extend the roads very slightly further like that. There we go. So now what we have done, and rename this to Village 2. So what we have now done is we have just essentially created the 2 villages. We've got Village 1 over here and Village 2 over here. And essentially our game can essentially revolve around these 2 villages. So like, let's say our character was to spawn here and he needs to go on like a mission to do something in like the other village, for example, or like fight enemies. So that's essentially what we could do, and that's what we're going to be like doing in the later episodes. If you guys have got ideas of what you'd like to see our like game do, as in what you'd want it to like do, as in like what you want by the end result, I've got loads of ideas of what we could do, and so essentially I will be following along with that. But if you guys want anything or suggest anything, please let me know in the comments. I am going to go ahead off camera and adjust some of these assets and cottages just to make it a bit more interesting. I'm sure you guys don't want to like just see me on camera editing and changing around the world, because that's not very interesting and don't really learn much because it's just designing and modeling. However, I will do that, and then I'll create an update, and then in the next video I'll just update you guys on what I've actually done to the world. And essentially, yeah. So yeah, this is the end of the video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I do realize I've actually said that the end of the video was a few minutes ago, but it's not. Sorry about that. But you know what I mean. Yeah, so that's the end of the video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do consider subscribing. Do give it a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.